The sea spoke in ripples, subtle and sibilant. The philosopher watched with his water face as the many steady undulations filled his mind with lost memories. The wheel had turned, ages had passed. The land of Dawn's beauty and all her inhabitants had forgotten the horrors of the distant past. The philosopher listened to the tides as they told their tale. In a previous Kalpa, the waters ran red with the blood of slaves. The tyrant Dread Kings, unsatisfied with the breadth of their dominions, waged war upon war in the struggle to expand their nebulous borders. High in his palace of glass and coral, Molag Bal, the chieftain of all dread kind, watched with unadulterated delight. Baal took on a different form in that ancient epoch. He was armoured in a cold, craggy carapace. He was made for the ocean. He flexed hinged chelipeds that could cut bone and crush steel. The metallic scent of blood on the breeze made his mandibles twitch. This aquatic realm was perfect for the Crab King of domination, as the ebbing and flooding of the tides meant that borders were never certain. Thus they were constantly in question, and the dregs were endlessly avaricious, always clutching for more land and power. Molag Bal revelled in his crustaceous incarnation, for he was the most tyrannical of all tyrants. But with time, Baal's oppressive regime would be swallowed by the swells, and his supremacy would be forgotten by all but the sea. This manifestation of the Mundex terrene was called Lig, and the Aedra who had committed their power to its creation watched in horror as Molag Bal subjugated its inhabitants. The Atada, the gods, knew intrinsically that they were superior to mortals. Mortals were frail and finite. Most of the original spirits, even the ones who refused to invest their power into the Mundus, had the decency to show restraint when engaging with these inferior beings. But Baal was different. He seemed incapable of attributing agency and sapience to them. In the Lord of Domination's eyes, mortals were objects, referred to with neuter pronouns. The absence of empathy meant that Baal never wavered in brutalizing and enslaving the masses of the mortal realm. The Aedra knew something had to be done, so they created a living weapon, the antithesis of Molag Bal. This weapon was a razor, and they named him Mehrunes. It was a delicate process, creating a god with the power to topple tyranny, that also wouldn't become a tyrant itself. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and beneath the earth, out of the Crab King's compound eyesight, the Star Orphans artificed a prince of good. A prince imbued with Oblivion's most precious and scarce asset, hope. His name was Mehrunes Dagon, and he rose from the depths with fists held aloft like crimson towers. These red arms were a cataclysmic tetralogy that heralded Baal's downfall, a four-fisted tale that would one day be immortalized within the pages of the Mysterium Xarxes. 4 fists, 4 keys. In his first arm, a storm. His second, the rush of plagued rain. The third, all the tinder of Anu. The fourth, the very eyes of Padhom. Dagon's first fist was a storm so savage that it shattered Baal's palace of glass and coral, and the shards fell like a rush of plagued rain, piercing the carapaces of the Dread Kings. And with his remaining arms, Dagon wielded the ineffable brightness of Anu and the anarchic darkness of Padamai. He changed Lig with Padhom's chaos, and with Anu's all-encompassing stasis, he set it free from limitation. Dagon liberated the slaves from their shackles, and they tore down Baal's empire. And when the brushfire of hope had burned the land and boiled the sea, Dagon showed the slaves Numantia, free will, liberty. And the realm of Lig was undone. Molag Bal was cast adrift on the waters of oblivion, until, at long last, Lorkhan and his Templars once more attempted to construct a mortal realm. The gods would not forget his autocracy in the adjacent place, however, and this time he would need to be cunning. But Molag Bal would return, and he would forever endeavour to dominate as completely as he once had, for that is Molag Bal's sphere. As I conducted my research into the Lord of Brutality, I was met with resistance. Mortal scholars are quick to warn me of Baal's evil nature. Others tell me he's a bully, driven by a concoction of spite and insecurity. But I disagree on both of these diagnoses. Molag Bal is a controversial figure, and we're going to uncover his true nature at any cost. Is he evil? Is he hiding a fragile ego behind a sturdy shell? Perhaps he's actually rather one-dimensional and mundane when compared to his Daedric counterparts. To answer these questions, we need to see how he interacted with the new Mundus, a version of the mortal realm that was far better protected from meddlesome spirits. Tamriel's tale featured its own cast of protagonists. There is evidence to suggest that the dregs of Tamriel were sapient, but their role in this story was far less significant. The Kai'Ma had dealings with them, calling them the Ultima of the Sea, but there was a noticeable decline in their intelligence this time around. Some say this is due to Dunmer hunters, who butchered a huge chunk of the Dreg population in order to harvest their hides and wax. I find this answer a little too convenient. What dwells in the depths is still largely unknown. Khajiit myths claim that Hamura, the spirit of the tides, records all the events he perceives and stores them away in a great library under the sea. Vivek attests to the arcane power of the dregs. They taught him their water face after all, and transformed the Nechaman's wife, and imbued Molag Bal's long-dead carapace of memory with mythic inflexibility. So, to say the dregs are nothing but overgrown mudcrabs in this Kalpa would be a grave mistake. Nevertheless, they do not feature heavily in this story. The elves had their era of eminence, as did the races of man. Carapaced or not, Molag Bal was unfazed, and his first known foray into Tamriel is no less brutal than his exploits in Lig. Nirn was still young when Bal walked Tamriel in the aspect of a man. The Harvester of Souls had watched the affairs of the mortal realm from afar, and there was one spirit he harboured a special grudge against. Arkay's sphere was the wheel of life, the cycle of birth and death, and Bal despised him for it. He considered it arrogant of the Aedra to so confidently declare their dominion over such forces. Molag Bal, like the other original spirits, was constant. He could not die, he was eternal, and he gave mortals a demented glimpse at this immortality by enslaving their souls within the confines of his bleak and barren Daedric realm. If Arkay wished to announce his authority over the Circle of Life, then Molag Bal, to spite him, would walk Tamriel as a man and make a mockery of this sacred circle. He would best death itself. Bal infiltrated a Nedic settlement and found his victim, a young priestess of Arkay, who was pure and full of optimism as only a youth can be. In one unspeakably egregious act, Bal defiled the girl and sullied her soul. It is said that her screams became the shrieking winds, which still haunt certain winding fjords of Skyrim. When the despicable deed was done, Bal shed a lone droplet of his cobalt blood upon the girl's brow, and having sown his wrath, he left Nirn. The priestess, named Lemay, lay dying in the grass, her blood desecrating the pristine verdure. Had the tale ended here, Bal's crime would already have been abhorrent enough. But the seed of the prince's wrath had yet to germinate, and when it did, it would bring unthinkable suffering to the mortals of Tamriel. For Molag Bal had wagered on one outcome. He knew that mortal kind were weak. He knew they possessed the most pitiful of traits, empathy. Kind souls would inevitably find the girl, and the fools would try to save her. Men and Mer placed so much value in life, it amused the sovereign of savagery. So much effort, and for what? To spare one candle from the snuff. The text titled Opusculus Lemay Bal to Mesamorti details this doomed act of mercy. Violated and comatose, Lemay was found by nomads and cared for. A fortnight hence, the nomad weird women enshrouded Lemay in a pall, for she had passed into death. As befits their tradition, the nomadic Needs built a bonfire to immolate the husk. But as the flames licked the night sky, the corpse of Lemay rose from her funeral pyre, and reefed in cinder and smoke she set upon the coven. She ripped at the throats of the women, she ate the eyes of the children, and she debased the men as cruelly as Bal had debased her. There was nothing of her purity left. She had been possessed entirely by Molag Bal's depravity. And so, Lemay, who is known to us as the Blood Matron, imprecated her foul aspect upon the folk of Tamriel, and begat a brood of countless abominations, from which came the vampires, most cunning of the night horrors. And so was the scourge of undeath wrought upon Tamriel, cruelly mocking Arkay's rhythm of life and death through all the coming eras of the Atada, and for all his sadness, Arkay knew this could not be undone. The curse of vampirism spread to every corner of Tamriel, and there really is no affliction more fitting for Baal's sphere. The Prince of Domination had come to the harsh realization that he could not subjugate Tamriel the way he had done to Lig. This iteration of the mortal realm had added protections. There was Akatosh Shor's Dragonblood Covenant, there was Azura's Lunar Lattice, and of course, there was the ever-present looming danger of Baal's arch-nemesis, Mehrunes the Razor. So, Baal's approach to enslaving the mortal populace and humiliating the realm's creators needed to be insidious. And so, he created the Vampire Menace, a threat that would seldom rear its head in the public eye, but would haunt dreams, incite rumours, and infiltrate institutions of power while remaining incognito. I mentioned before that Baal does not believe mortals are sapient. He views them more like animals, capable of cognition, but not truly willful spirits with real autonomy. You can imagine too that after Mehrunes Dagon demolished Lig, displaying to the mindless slaves in glorious omnicolour the intoxicating liberty of Numantia, Molag Bal would be even less inclined to reconsider his position. While I don't believe the Prince of Domination to be spiteful, there is no doubt he harbours a grudge against Dagon for freeing the Crab King's pets from their cages. Baal's insistence that mortals are objects and not truly intelligent beings, and his desire to torment mortals by revealing this truth to them, works in perfect harmony with the curse of vampirism. Mortals are hardly going to dehumanize themselves, but by compelling his followers to feed on the blood of their species, vampires treat other mortals like resources, founts of fuel rather than individuals. Additionally, vampires are notorious for blending surreptitiously into society, influencing politics and accruing power from within Tamriel's most prominent governments and monarchies. While Baal is not one for introspection, there is no denying that his arrogance and hubris when ruling Lig was his downfall. Revolution was scried on the tides of fate. This time Baal would whittle away at Tamriel, dominating in secret, despoiling bloodlines, using fear as his mind killer. Another of Molag Bal's underhanded schemes came in the form of a significant arcane innovation. Only this innovation was morally ambiguous and would cause a great divide among mortal mages. According to an unofficial source, the Imperial Census of Daedra Lords, in ancient times, Molag Bal reputedly lent his infernal power to the creation of the first soul gems. Now, there is no explicit canon mention of Baal creating soul gems, but in his plane of Coldharbour, soul gems are fine-tuned to improve efficiency, and according to the legend of Vestari, a student of the Psijic Order who worked alongside Mannimarco to advance the art of soul trapping. Believing the secret lay with Molag Bal, the two conspired to enter Coldharbour and wrest it from the father of vampires himself. Mannimarco and his followers held open a portal to the prince's realm, ever thirsting for adventure. It was Vestari who entered its depths and returned with a cache of black crystals the likes of which they had never seen. Whether or not this was how black soul gems were discovered, or whether that accomplishment should be attributed to Sopha Sil when creating his Clockwork Titans, matters little. The fact of the matter is, the frigid rocks of Molag Bal's realm can be mined for black soul gems, and these gems were crucial in allowing Mannimarco to innovate the art of necromancy. Once more, Baal's influence was pernicious. The Khajiiti silent priest, Amun-Dro, asserts that the demon king Molag often attempts to tear down the lunar lattice, and does so with nefarious zeal. We've discussed his less conspicuous methods of weakening the foundations of the Mundus, but sometimes the volatile prince is not so sly. Baal demands a steady influx of mortal souls entering his realm, so that they may be tormented for all eternity beneath the confines of Coldharbour's sunless skies. One method of acquiring souls, which is generally warded against by the forces that created the Mundus, is through portals. Portals to oblivion rarely emerge on Tamriel, and Daedra Lords require co-conspirators within the mortal realm to make it possible. Mehrunes Dagon needed Mankar Camoran and the Mythic Dawn to sever the Dragonborn bloodline, and extinguish the Dragonfires. It's possible that Molag Bal made a similar compact with a non-Tamrielic race, the Slode of Thras. West of Dawn's Beauty, across the Abyssian Sea, lie the Coral Kingdoms. The Slode will have their own deep dive in a future video, but the Slugfolk seem to be the perfect collaborators for a prince like Baal. They are a conniving race, brutal and avaricious. The Pocket Guide to the Empire First Edition states, "Morally repugnant, every slowed individual encountered has been a grasping, callous, godless, self-loving schemer. They do not seem to experience or display any familiar human emotions, though they are skilled diplomats and actors and produce gross, exaggerated parodies of human behaviour. They have no compunctions about blasphemy, theft, torture, kidnapping, murder or genocide. They break laws whenever they calculate it in their best interests. They do not perceive or honour friendship or loyalty in the familiar human terms, except for a cheerful affinity for those who defeat them or trick them in any endeavour. Morian Xenos' research into the Doors of Oblivion, penned by his apprentice, reveals something unexpected about the vile race. It seems they had some kind of reverence for a higher power, and made sacrifices into a portal of oblivion. It reads, "The whirlpool in the Abyssian called the Maelstrom of Baal can make ships disappear, and may be a portal into oblivion, but the trauma of riding its waters would surely slay any who tried. Likewise, we did not consider it worth the risk to leap from the Pillar of Phras, a 1,000-foot tall spiral of coral, though we witnessed the sacrifices that the Slode made there." The Slode infamously unleashed the Thrashan Plague upon Tamriel in First Era 2200, an epidemic that wiped out approximately half of the continent's population. The mortal devastation was beyond comprehension. I would argue that a cataclysm of this magnitude was beyond even Peryite's sphere. Peryite may be the Prince of Pestilence, but he is also the Lord of Natural Order, and his pandemics serve this natural order. Erasing half the mortal population of Tamriel far exceeds the necessities of natural order. There are some issues in the timeline regarding when exactly the plague reached Tamriel's shores, and how soon the races of the mainland responded. There is no doubt that time seems strangely stretched in the multiple millennia spanning First Era. But whatever the case, in First Era 2260, the All-Flags Navy saw the combined might of Tamriel retaliate against the Slugfolk, for they believed the Slode had artificially produced the disease and spread it through the use of infected sea beasts. Despite enduring fierce storms and dense fog, the fleet entered the Thrashan archipelago and laid siege to the coral tower that jutted from the precipice of the largest island. And from the journal of one Argonian sailor named Sona I, we learn the truth of this mysterious maelstrom of Baal. The Slodes are powerful necromancers, but they are poor hand-to-hand fighters, and our numbers dwarf theirs. Still they fought, and they died as we conquered their island. They whispered curses to their Daedric lord with their dying breaths as we took their gold, their goods, and their lives. The blue light atop the coral tower began to pulse and bleed energy into the clouded sky. When the ground beneath our feet began to quake and tremble, no one had to tell us to run. The island began to crack and sink. The sea around Phras boiled as we rode for our lives back to the Golden Era. We were hauled back on deck in time to watch the coral tower collapse into the sea. We noticed too late the current that pulled us towards it. As the eye of blue light atop the tower dipped into the sea, it began to spin like a great wheel, and when it met the waves it formed a monstrous whirlpool. Half the fleet was drawn into it, our ship included. As we were sucked into the pulsing blue light beneath the maelstrom, I felt water rush over my scales. Before the sea could consume me, a gale of cold wind exploded from below. We were no longer sinking, we were falling. As I clung to the deck, I saw that the whirling wall of water had been replaced by a dark, haunted sky, and an infinite expanse of cold, dead earth. And it was rushing to meet us as we fell. I blacked out, waking up sometime later on the deck. I remember seeing the captain talking to what appeared to be a great beast. I remember the beast handing the captain something, and then I blacked out again. When I awoke, I was transformed. My scales and skin were gone. I was naught but bones. The captain was now the admiral, and whatever he commanded we could not refuse. More ships fell from the sky, and our lost fleet grew. We put the Era back together, dug tunnels, and constructed a town from the wreckage of the other ships. All at the Admiral's command. We hate him, but we cannot disobey him. It's that crown he wears. That infinite expanse of cold dead earth was Cold Harbor. The great beast was none other than Molag Bal, and the crown he gave to the treacherous captain was the Crown of Bones, an artifact of Baal's creation. We could get lost in a maelstrom of speculation regarding Molag Baal's relationship with the Slugfolk. There are aspects of Slode culture that are starkly reminiscent of the tyrannous aquatic kings of Lig, but this video belongs to Baal, and despite their utility, the Slode are still tools to the Lord of Domination, like all other finite beings. The Maelstrom of Baal foreshadowed the Harvester of Souls' most significant attempt to conquer the Mundus. As we mentioned earlier, Baal fostered no delusions that he could enter Nirn and rule it as he had ruled Lig, but he had succeeded in absorbing parts of the mortal world into his realm via the Maelstrom. Therefore, what if he could construct devices capable of ripping huge chunks of Nirn free from the Mundus, and pulling them on great chains into Coldharbour? This calamitous ploy would become known in the annals of history as the Plane Meld. For all of Baal's protuberant flaws, there is no denying that he is a skilled artificer, or at least that he is skilled at supervising skilled artificers. Whatever the case, Baal's vile laboratory and Black Forge have been the wellspring for some of Oblivion's most ingenious innovations. In his vile laboratory, Baal and his servants fashioned a variety of Daedric creatures, including the Zivkin, a hybridization of the Dremora with the bulkier Zivali, and the Daedric Titan, a corrupted form of dragon. And within the Black Forge, Baal mass-produces the arms and armour worn by his Daedric hordes. It is also the factory within which the Dark Anchors and the Great Shackle were manufactured. The Great Shackle was forged from approximately 20,000 tons of ebony alloy cold iron, in a great forge full of the uniquely incandescent charcoal of remorse, quenched in the blood of 1,000 innocents. With these ingredients, Molag Bal had reached moustache-twirling levels of dastardliness. It was the 582nd year of the Second Era when Manamako initiated the infamous Soul Burst, preventing the Dragonfires from being reignited. The King of Worms sundered the barrier between Mundus and Oblivion. Many mortal souls were cast adrift in the void, and Molag Bal watched the arcane explosion from the shores of Coldharbour. It was a beacon that kindled the apocalypse. The skies were cloven, and from these great ruptures in the cosmos, the Lord of Domination's dark anchors fell. Hooks of heavy iron clawed at the foundations of Nirn, sinking deep into the soil. The chains grew taut, and the very bones of the earth began to creak from the strain. Molag Bal was attempting to pull Nirn into his domain. There is no doubt in my mind that Molag Bal's frustration over his inability to oppress this iteration of the mortal realm inspired this grand scheme. He could not rule a realm governed by Lorkhan the Trickster and his Templars, so perhaps the solution was not conquest, but rather relocation. If Nirn dwelt within his plane of oblivion, then he would be the rightful ruler of the planet. Planes of oblivion are extensions of their respective prince's psyche, so if the plane meld was successful, then Nirn would become Molag Bal's intellectual property. The plane meld ultimately, inevitably failed. Molag Bal was humiliated by the Vestige, who used the Amulet of Kings to channel the power of Akatosh, or is actually Shor, and release the Mundus from Baal's stranglehold. Molag Bal's fixation on conquering the mortal realm is evident in his realm. In a conscious state, it is possible to conceal clearly unhealthy obsessions. You can distract your waking mind, you can deny how you feel or delude yourself entirely. But subconsciously, in your dreams for instance, these obsessions roam free, unimpeded by inhibition. Such is the case in Coldharbour, which is an extension of Molag Bal. In his adventures through the doors of Oblivion, the conjurer Morian Zenith describes Baal's plane. The sky is on fire, the ground is sludge but traversable. I see blackened ruins all around me, like a war was fought here in the distant past. The air is freezing. I cast blooms of warmth all around me, but it still feels like daggers of ice stabbing me in all directions. It appeared to Zenith as if it were a future Nirn, desolate and barren, filled with suffering. I could hear Morian Zenith weep at the images he saw, and shiver at the sight of the Imperial Palace, spattered with blood and excrement. The Vestige sees much of Coldharbour in Second Era 582, and it seems clear from the ruined Ayleid architecture and the profane forgery of the White Gold Tower at the realm's heart that this is a copy of Tamriel. But I have an alternate theory about Coldharbour. Zenith comments that it looks like a war was fought in Coldharbour in the distant past. yet also like a future post-apocalyptic Nirn. The concept of time isn't so strict outside the mortal realm. Auriel solidified time, and the Mundus follows its inexorable flow. But as Chamberlain Haskell once stated, inhabitants of the Shivering Isles are affected by time, but we are not subject to it. We are subjects of Lord Sheogorath, who subjects us to whatever subjects he is in the mood to subjudicate, because time is subjective. This ties into my point about Planes of Oblivion being governed by the will of the respective prince, and nothing else. So, my theory for Coldharbour is that this realm is not an imitation of Tamriel, but rather of Lig. I believe Molag Bal has clung on to the remnants of his destroyed world, the world he once ruled. Hence the war that was fought in the distant past. As for the Tamrielic architecture, the White Gold Tower was erected as an open emulation of Adamantia, the Doreni Tower, the Tower, Tower Zero. This tower was constructed by the gods and was the site of convention. If the adjacent place of Lig was created following the same schematics as Tamriel Nirn, then Lig would have had its own Tower Zero. The Mythic Dawn commentary state that Lig did in fact have towers. Mehrunes Dagon and his slave army tore these very towers down in order to destroy the realm. Mankar writes, "For with the magic word Numantia, a great rebellion rose up and pulled down the towers of Kimel Garjig." Kimel Garjig loosely translates to Royal Hands of Order in Elnifex. Granted, the depiction of Coldharbour in the Elder Scrolls Online may debunk my theory, for the visual similarities between Coldharbour and Tamriel are striking. But I can't help but wonder if this alternative theory was the original idea for Baal's realm. It makes so much sense. Lig was liberated, and the realm was unmade, its remnants doomed to sink into the waters of oblivion, remembered only by the undulating waves. But Baal, upon returning to oblivion, might have salvaged what he could, making a monument to his historic dominance within his own dominion. It fits his personality perfectly. Molag Bal is not a three-dimensional character. He is a villain with little complexity, and no discernible redeeming qualities. For this reason, you would be justified in declaring him the worst Daedric prince. But in a way, this makes him quite unique, for he seems to be the only one of his ilk. I can ramble on and on about the motivations of the Daedra Lords. As a Daedrologist, I've somewhat branded myself around it. Molag Bal, though, is grasping and greedy. He wishes to conquer, to dominate, to enslave. He is spiteful purely because he enjoys subjugating and causing suffering. Yet I don't believe he is evil, nor do I believe he is an insecure bully. I believe he simply does not view mortals as sapient beings, and attributes no value to their existence. If all mortals are objects, if they are referred to as it rather than him or her, why should he care about causing them anguish? There are plenty of intelligent beings that even mortals care little for. The Ultima once had no qualms enslaving goblins. The Dunmer consider beastfolk beneath them. In fact, they consider all other races inferior. Is it so hard to believe that a god would view mortals as insignificant insects beneath his draconian feet? He bestows immortality upon some mortals, and in doing so, he deprives them of an afterlife in Aetherius, and they become glorified minions for eternity in Coldharbour. All other mortal souls he captures become indentured servants. In some respects, Molag Bal is the antithesis of Mehrunes Dagon. Dagon represents the hope, ambition and freedom of mortals against tyranny, but Bal refuses to acknowledge the complexities of mortality and their free will. He's like a child looking down upon an anthill. He is an overseer of what he perceives to be mindless drones. From this perspective, can you call it evil? Can a child bully ants, or is it just entertainment? Why should a god have empathy for mortal kind? Is it arrogance to expect any kind of magnanimity from the divine? Alas, I might have left you with more questions than I've answered. I'd rather not attract any more of the prince's attention, for I can't imagine he appreciates mortal daedrologists psychoanalyzing him, so I shall leave my research in your capable hands. Now I'm going to stand by the shore, where I'll practice my water face, and watch for hidden truths and histories submerged beneath the sea. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. My name is Drew the Daedrologist. You've been watching Drumora, and I'll see you in the next one.